They didn't even knock. 3 riders thundered up the slope and dumped her in front of the cabin like a sack of potatoes. Rain's wrists were tied, her cheek was bleeding, and her dress had torn at the shoulder. The wind howled down from the mountain peaks, biting through her thin sleeves as one of the men banged on the heavy wooden door. "We brought your payment, Crowley," he shouted. "Debt settled, as agreed." The door creaked open just enough to reveal a pair of sharp gray eyes beneath a dark brow. The man they called Crowley didn't step out. He looked at Rain, then at the men. "I never asked for a girl." One of the men laughed bitterly. "You asked for payment. You'll find she's worth more than any coin. Her father said she's your problem now." Then, without another word, they turned their horses and vanished into the snow. Crowley didn't speak. He stood silently, as if calculating whether the frozen girl at his feet was real. Rain tried to rise but stumbled. The cords around her wrists had left red welts, and the cold made her vision blur. "Please," she whispered, "I haven't eaten in 2 days." Crowley finally stepped forward. He wasn't a young man, maybe 35, but he moved with the quiet power of someone used to surviving storms alone. His coat was bearskin, his beard thick with frost, and his boots were cracked from years of mountain wear. Without a word, he bent down, cut her wrists free with a hunting knife, and hoisted her into his arms. Rain flinched. She'd been thrown, grabbed, and shoved so many times she no longer knew what gentleness felt like. Inside the cabin, the fire roared. It smelled of pine and meat and something unfamiliar. A man's life without a woman's touch. Crowley set her down on a cot by the hearth and handed her a bowl of broth. "You can stay," he said, "but you'll earn your keep or starve. I don't feed charity." Rain nodded, clutching the warm bowl like it was gold. She didn't care what the terms were. She just needed to live. She didn't know what this mountain man expected. But as she looked into those watchful gray eyes, something inside her whispered. He wasn't like the others. Rain awoke to the smell of smoke and the faint crackle of snow melting off her boots. Her hands throbbed, wrists still marked from the rope her uncles had tied, but she didn't move. Not yet. The cabin was quiet except for the soft breath of wolves outside, pacing in the snow. She had heard them in the night, low growls and the occasional bark, but they hadn't come in. Only the mountain man had. He sat near the fire now, sharpening a knife on a flat stone, the rhythmic scrape like a metronome in the silence. Rain shifted slowly and reached for the bowl on the floor, only to realize it had already been refilled. She looked at him. "You don't have to be kind. I know what they told you." He didn't look up. "They told me to use you until the debt felt even." Her stomach turned. She tightened her fingers around the bowl. "And will you?" His knife paused. Then he looked up, eyes unreadable. "If I wanted a servant, I'd have asked for one. If I wanted company, I'd have gotten a dog. You were dumped here like refuse. But you're a person. I won't treat you like less. Just don't expect softness from me. This mountain doesn't give it, and neither do I." She didn't expect that answer. She didn't expect the way her heart clenched either. For days, her mind had been braced for cruelty, for fists, for leering eyes and heavy hands. Instead, she got a man who didn't smile, didn't ask questions, and didn't touch her. Not even when he lifted her like a broken bird. "I can cook," she said softly. "I can sew too if you have thread." "You're not here to impress me," he replied. "You're here because someone owed me a life and thought yours was worth as little as their word." He stood and walked outside, the door thudding shut behind him. Rain exhaled shakily. Wolves gathered at the tree line. 4 of them. Thick fur, yellow eyes, and snow-laced breath. They didn't attack. They watched, like they knew something. She wrapped the threadbare blanket tighter around herself and whispered, "Where have I come?" The wind outside howled through the cracks, and the firelight flickered over the cabin walls. The man she feared most hadn't touched her. The beasts outside hadn't growled. But she knew in her bones, this place was not safe. Not because it was cruel, but because it asked her to hope. And she hadn't done that in years. She had only been in the cabin 3 days when it happened. Rain had taken to gathering firewood just outside the door, staying within sight of the window and never turning her back to the tree line. The wolves never came close, but they were always there, always watching. Crowley never mentioned them. He moved around them like they were part of the land, like the rocks or wind or snow. She assumed he didn't fear them because they feared him. But on the 3rd morning, when she stepped out barefoot to shake the dust from a blanket, one of the wolves was waiting. A white one, huge, scarred across the muzzle, one blue eye and one gold. It didn't snarl. It didn't move. It just stood, no more than 10 feet away, watching her. Rain froze, the blanket slipping from her fingers. Her breath clouded between them. The wolf tilted its head, then stepped forward. She wanted to scream, wanted to run, but her legs locked and something deep inside whispered, "Don't." It padded closer, so close she could see the steam of its breath rising into the pale morning air. Then it lowered its body, ears flat, and lay down, still watching. The cabin door creaked. Crowley stood there, one brow raised. "You didn't run." She shook her head slowly. "Should I have?" He stared at her for a long moment. "That's Ghost. He doesn't lie down for anyone." "Is he yours?" she asked. Crowley stepped forward and crouched beside the animal, resting one hand gently behind its ears. "Number he's his own. Like me." The wolf stood and brushed against Rain's leg as it walked past, disappearing into the trees like mist. She exhaled, every muscle trembling now that it was over. Crowley handed her the blanket. "You have a quietness they trust. That's rare." She wasn't sure if it was a compliment or a warning. That night she found a single rabbit skinned and laid neatly on the cabin porch. Crowley hadn't hunted. She had watched him whittle instead. The wolves had provided. She roasted the meat and said thank you aloud, unsure if she was speaking to the man or the beasts. When she sat by the fire, Crowley finally asked, "What were you before they brought you here?" She thought for a long moment. "I was a burden. At least that's what they told me." He didn't argue. He didn't comfort her. But the wolves were closer that night. One even howled, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel entirely alone. Snow fell heavier that night, muffling every sound except the low crackle of fire and the occasional rustle outside the window. Rain sat stitching a torn shirt sleeve by the hearth, her fingers moving more for the sake of movement than need. Crowley hadn't spoken much since Ghost lay at her feet earlier. Something had shifted in his eyes, just a flicker, but enough to notice. She finally asked, "Have the wolves always lived this close?" He looked up from sharpening his axe. "Number not until last winter." She waited, hoping he'd say more. He didn't. She pressed again. "Why'd they come?" Crowley set the axe down. "They remember things better than people. Pain, mercy, death." He leaned back against the log wall. "One winter, I found a den. Cubs barely breathing. Their mother was caught in a trap. I let her die fast and warmed the pups against my chest till they could walk again. Most left. A few stayed." Rain's breath caught. "Ghost?" He nodded. "He's the one who bit me when I tried to take the trap off." Crowley held up his left hand. 3 fingers, not 4. He never forgot that pain, but he came back anyway. The fire snapped. Rain stared into it. And me? Why do they trust me? Crowley didn't look at her. Maybe they see what you're hiding from yourself. She thought of the men who dragged her here, of the child that had never come, of the years spent trying to earn a kind word from those who thought her existence was a stain. They think I'm ruined, she whispered. Used. Broken. Crowley didn't flinch. Then they're fools. It was the first kind word he'd spoken, and it felt sharper than any cruelty. I'm not asking for anything from you, Rain, he said after a pause. You don't owe me your story, or your gratitude, or your body. He stood, stretched, and reached for his coat. But you're warm here, you're fed, and the wolves won't let anyone come near unless I say so. Why? She asked, voice trembling. Why are you being kind? He looked at her, eyes steady. Because someone should have been, long ago. He opened the door and stepped out into the falling snow. Rain sat motionless, the needle still threaded between her fingers. Outside, a howl rose, long and low and mournful. Not lonely, not afraid, just present. That night, she didn't dream of ropes or men or punishment. She dreamed of a white wolf curled beside her and a hand that never reached in greed, only in quiet permission. The tracks didn't belong to any wolf. Rain saw them first, just past the chicken coop where the snow had settled soft and deep. 2 sets of boot prints, one newer than the other, one headed toward the cabin, the other away. She stood frozen, heart hammering in her chest. Crowley emerged from the trees carrying a split deer carcass over one shoulder. The wolves trailed behind him in silent formation, Ghost leading. Rain pointed. Someone was here. Crowley knelt beside the prints, eyes narrowing. They came close. Who? She asked, already knowing it wasn't a neighbor. Crowley didn't answer. He rose, set the meat down on the chopping block, and walked straight inside. When Rain followed, he was already pulling open a floorboard under the hearth. He retrieved a rifle and a folded wool bag. Sit tight today, he said. Don't go past the pines. Ghost will stay close. Should I be afraid? She asked. Crowley paused. Only if they come back. That night Rain didn't sleep. She kept the fire going and watched the window until her eyes ached. Ghost lay near the door, ears twitching at every gust. At dawn, she heard the crunch of snow outside, slow, measured footsteps. She crouched, hand on the fire poker, breath shallow. But it was Crowley. Blood on his sleeve, a cut on his cheek. He didn't speak as he shut the door behind him. Was it them? She asked. The ones who left me here? He nodded, wiping the blood from his brow. 2 of them. Thought they could come back for the spoils. Rain swallowed hard. You didn't... No one died, he said, sitting heavily on the stool. But they'll think twice now. Told them next time they answered a ghost. She wanted to thank him, wanted to run, wanted to cry. Instead, she sat across from him and poured tea into 2 chipped cups. I don't understand you, she whispered. Why not send me away? You didn't ask for this. No, he said, his eyes never leaving hers. But maybe this place was waiting for someone to belong to it again. And maybe that someone is you. She blinked. The words didn't sound like Crowley. They sounded like someone who hadn't spoken in years. Someone just now remembering how. Outside, the wolves howled. Not warning, not threat. A call. And Rain, for the first time, felt her heartbeat slow in rhythm with the packs. Not prey, not property, just something wild learning how to stand still and stay. Rain was splitting kindling when he said it. The wind had quieted. The wolves were gone for the afternoon, off into the deeper pines. Crowley stood beside the shed, sharpening a blade in slow circles, and without looking up, he said, I've been waiting. She stopped, axe mid-air. For what? She asked carefully. He met her eyes. For someone to call this home. For someone not to flinch when I speak. For quiet that doesn't feel like punishment. Rain let the axe fall. This can't be what you wanted. A broken girl dropped at your doorstep like a bag of flour. I never asked for anything, he said, but when they dragged you here, I saw something I hadn't seen in years. Not pity, not rage, just fight. And when Ghost didn't growl, I knew. Knew what? That you weren't just some girl they threw away. You were the one the mountain had been holding space for. Rain folded her arms, trying not to cry. You speak like you've known me longer than a week. I've known the kind of silence you wear, the way you sleep like someone's coming with a rope. I've seen that before, in me. He stepped closer, not touching, just standing near enough that his breath fogged beside hers in the cold. I don't need thanks. I don't want debt, but I won't let you think you're a burden. Not here. The words cracked something inside her. She turned away, but he stopped her. Not by force, just a hand gently on her shoulder. Rain, he said, you're not here to earn anything. Not food, not shelter, not your worth. She looked at him then, really looked. The jagged scar near his eye, the calloused hands, the quiet kindness hiding behind his guarded face. And for once, she didn't feel small under a man's gaze. She felt seen. You said you've been waiting, she whispered. I think I have too. That night, she set out 2 bowls instead of 1. She added a second blanket to his chair by the fire. She brushed her hair with her fingers and tied it with a piece of deer leather she found in a drawer. And when Ghost came back, trailing snow and silence, he didn't go to Crowley's bed. He curled beside hers, as if something had shifted, as if the cabin was no longer his alone. And neither was the waiting. The thaw came with warning. Not from the clouds or the birds, but from Ghost, who wouldn't leave the porch that morning, pacing, nose twitching, ears pinned. Rain watched him from the window, arms wrapped tight around herself. Crowley was gone, having taken the sled down to the ravine to check the traps, and the longer he stayed, the more the air seemed to shift, heavier, meaner. Ghost growled low, then barked once toward the north trail. Rain stepped outside, the cold biting into her boots. What is it, boy? The trees gave no answer, but something was coming. She could feel it. She rushed inside and packed what little she could into a flour sack. Dried meat, the bone knife, her coat. Then she stoked the fire and left a log ready for Crowley in case she didn't come back. When she opened the door again, Ghost was already running. Not wild, not afraid. Leading. She followed him through the brush, her breath short, the snow crunching underfoot like cracking glass. Then she saw it. Crowley's sled overturned, dogs missing, one of the traps shattered. Blood marked the snow in broken streaks. Crowley! She shouted, voice shaking. Crowley, where are you? A groan answered from behind the spruce. She found him slumped against the trunk, leg bent wrong, eyes cloudy with pain. Didn't see them. Wolves? He muttered. No, she said, heart pounding. Not wolves. Men. She didn't wait. She tore her coat in strips, bound his leg as best she could, and with Ghost's help, pulled together a drag from fallen branches and the trap sled. For 2 hours she hauled him back, her hands raw, her knees buckling. But she didn't stop. Not even when the wind picked up or the trees howled. Not even when Crowley passed out twice from the pain. She got him to the cabin, got the fire high, got him warm. She used the snowmelt to clean the wound and boiled sage from the cupboard for infection. Ghost never left her side, lying beside Crowley like a sentinel. That night, Rain stayed up, feeding him water, whispering words she didn't know she still remembered. Prayers, maybe. or promises. When his eyes opened just before dawn, he didn't ask what happened. He just said, hoarse and dry, "You stayed." She took his hand. "Of course I did." And for the first time, the silence between them wasn't cold. It was sacred. Crowley could barely move, but his instincts remained sharp. When Rain stirred the fire and told him she'd seen fresh boot tracks beyond the cedar grove, he tensed beneath the blankets. "They weren't yours?" he asked. "Too wide," she said. "Too deep. Someone heavy. 2 sets." Crowley's jaw locked. "That's not trappers. That's them." Rain didn't ask who. She knew. The kind of men who dragged girls by their hair and called it justice. The kind who sold favors owed by other families. Her stomach twisted. "They're coming back for me." "No," Crowley said, voice like gravel. "They're not." But he couldn't even stand. Rain paced. Ghost paced with her. The rifle on the mantel hadn't been touched in years. She didn't know how to shoot. "There's no law out here," she said softly. "Only snow, trees, and people who decide what life is worth." Crowley looked up. "You're not theirs to take." "I wasn't yours either," she said. "And yet—" He didn't respond. He didn't have to. They both knew what had changed. By nightfall, the wind brought smoke. Cook fire. Too close to be coincidence. Rain braced the door with wood beams, covered the windows with the wool blankets. Ghost growled at every creak. And then, just after midnight, footsteps. Voices. "Crowley, you got our girl inside? Or did she die of laziness already?" Laughter followed. Drunken. Cruel. She looked to Crowley, who tried to sit up but collapsed with a grunt. She took the bone-handled knife and slipped it into her boot. "I'm not hiding," she whispered. "I'm not running again." "You don't need to." "Yes, I do." She stepped outside, wind lashing her hair. "She ain't much to look at," one of them sneered, stepping forward. "But she still owes us a week's worth of work." Rain held her ground. "You're not getting anything from me. Not food, not fear, not blood." They laughed, until Ghost came through the dark like thunder, teeth bared, snarling from the shadows. One man stumbled back, the other drew a pistol, but then another shape moved behind him. A figure tall and silent. Crowley, on his feet, barely, rifle in shaking hands. "You step 1 inch closer," he said, "and I'll bury you beneath the snow, nameless and unmourned." The 2 men hesitated, then backed off, not fast, but enough. The fire in Rain's chest didn't fade even after they vanished. She turned to Crowley. "You stood." "Had to," he said. "I've been waiting too long to lose you now." By dawn, they were gone, but the storm they carried lingered. Not in the sky, in her chest. Rain moved slowly through the cabin, checking windows, bolting shutters tighter, feeding the fire like it was the only god she trusted. Crowley slept most of the morning, his leg wrapped in wool, the swelling a little better, but the pain never far. Ghost remained curled at the door, rising only when Rain stepped out to gather snow for water. When she returned, Crowley was awake, watching her like she was something he'd dreamed up and didn't dare lose again. "You never asked what they used to call me," she said, sitting beside him. He didn't speak. He waited. "They called me Mutt, because I was born in winter and my mother died giving birth. No one claimed me. I was passed from aunt to cousin to stranger. I slept in barns, ate the bones the dogs left. They said I was bad luck, cursed, that I made milk dry and babies die." She exhaled slowly, eyes on the flames. "So when they offered me to you, they weren't punishing me. They were getting rid of a mistake." Crowley shifted, reached for her hand. "They were wrong." "Were they?" she whispered. "I've survived, sure, but I've never belonged. Not anywhere." "You belong here," Because I can cook and fetch water? Because you don't flinch from wolves? Because you pulled me back from the dead with sage tea and stubborn hands? Because you made silence feel like peace instead of prison? Rain stared at him. Do you believe in second names? I believe people change, he said. And when they do, the name that fits their scars doesn't always fit their soul. She blinked hard. What would you call me then? He smiled, pain curling the edges. I'd call you the woman who made a broken man stand again. She laughed, quiet, breathy, stunned. Then her laughter turned to tears, and she didn't hide them. Didn't need to. Ghost lifted his head and let out a soft, approving sound, like even he understood something sacred had happened. Later, when the sun dipped low and the shadows turned blue, Rain stood at the doorway. She didn't look out in fear. She looked in wonder. What if they come back? She asked. Crowley, half dozing, murmured. Then we make sure they regret it. She nodded. And for the first time, the name they'd given her, Mutt, felt like it belonged to someone else. Someone she no longer was. They didn't leave at dawn. They left when the girl took Crowley's hand without being asked. There was no ceremony, no goodbye feast. Only quiet nods from the land, from Ghost who trotted beside them like a shadow with purpose, from the pines that no longer loomed but watched. Crowley walked slow, favoring the leg still stiff with healing. Rain stayed beside him, matching pace, carrying nothing but the pack slung across her shoulder and a quiet steadiness in her chest. This land'll remember you, Crowley said as they passed the old cedar where she'd first seen the boot tracks. I think it already does, she replied. It gave me you. He glanced at her, brow furrowed. You think I was a gift? You think I wasn't, she shot back, and they both smiled, soft and real, the kind that stretches across scars and doesn't feel strange. At the ridge, they paused. From here, the valley looked like a different country, one where girls weren't sold, where men didn't vanish into drink, where winters didn't punish hope. Ghost let out a low sound. His ears twitched. Something below. Movement, but not danger. Children. A woman leading them along the creek. Homesteaders passing through, maybe. Rain felt her chest tighten. She reached into her pack and pulled out the old ribbon from her braid, the one they'd used to gag her, humiliate her. She tied it to a low-hanging branch. So no girl ever forgets she can turn back, she said. Crowley looked at her with something more than admiration, reverence. You're not who they said you were. I never was. Then who are you now? She turned toward him, eyes steady. I'm the woman who dragged herself up a mountain and found a man who didn't look away, who didn't ask for anything but stayed when I had nothing left. He swallowed hard. You're not mine to keep. No, she whispered, but I'm still walking beside you. They walked past the ridge together, down towards the tree line. The wind had softened. Snow no longer bit at her hands. And with every step, the world felt less cruel, less carved by men who spoke in fists. Ghost stopped once to look back. Rain did too, but only for a moment. Then they all moved forward, toward the small shack with smoke rising from its chimney, and a roof patched with care. Toward the life they'd saved from winter, and toward the names they would now choose for themselves. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Echoes of the West. If you'd seen her dragged to that cabin, would you have walked away or stayed too? Tell us in the comments.